Joining us now is Father Elias Mary Mills of the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate. Father, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure to be with you.
We're going to talk a little bit about your world travels and some of the experiences you've had, but for you it all began in Nebraska, didn't it? You're from Nebraska.
Well, yes, I'm a Cornhusker through and through. I say I bleed red and blue. Red for Cornhuskers and blue for Our Lady. So anyway.
That's great. And so you were born in Kearney?
I was born in Kearney. Was born on my mother's birthday, of all things. So that kind of was a special connection between mother and son. And baptized in a little church, St. Mary's in Oconto, which I always knew it was the St. Mary's, but this past summer I went there and my cousin said that when they built it, the church, the farmers, didn't know how to spell Immaculate Conception, so they just said, we'll call it St. Mary's. So you might say I was baptized under the patronage already of Our Lady's Immaculate Conception. Little did I know, so.
And you went to Kearney State College, and I think it was mathematics and computer science that you focused on?
I started out actually at Peru State, majoring in art. I wanted to be a cartoonist, but after a semester there, I realized that maybe the future wasn't going to be in that, and I thought maybe computer graphics. So I thought, well, maybe I need to get some background in computer science. So then I switched my majors and went back to Kearney and graduated in 1985, in December of 1985. It's already going to be almost 40 years ago. In math and minor in computer science, but I never really used it for anything other because in the middle of my education I realized that I might have a vocation, and so I realized I was home from spring break from college. It was in March of 1984, and it was only a parish mission that I ever remember having in our parish at St. Anne's in Lexington. And the priest came and spoke about many things, but one of the things that he did was he was wearing the Carmelite habit. And he said that he had the permission from the Carmelites to wear the habit as a third order diocesan priest, and that he could enroll people in the scapular, and that he could even wanted to start a third order. So that piqued my interest, and so I think I wore the scapular as a young boy and throughout high school, the scapular medal mainly. So when he said something about the third order, I started to reach out to him and eventually became a third order Carmelite, and maintained that through my years at Kearney State, would pray the office and things, thinking that maybe I might pursue something in that direction, but God's ways are not our ways. And eventually, after graduating, I went out and helped the priest for a while in his parish out in Wyoming, and then he helped me to get into Holy Apostles Seminary in Connecticut, where I went for 2 years as an unsponsored seminarian, and it was there that I met the Franciscans of the Immaculate on my last semester at Holy Apostles. So.
Wow. And you were eventually ordained a priest by Bishop Fabian Bruskewitz.
Yes.
How did that
So in 1999, I was sent to Italy for an experience, and at that time they said the possibility, if you make your final profession, that if you're going to be ordained a priest, it might be by Pope John Paul II. And we found out that he was no longer ordaining anyone other than seminarians from the Diocese of Rome. So I said to myself, well, the next best bishop after Pope John Paul II to me was Bishop Fabian, because he was so Catholic and such a zealous man for the faith. So I said I'd like to be ordained back in Nebraska by Bishop Fabian, and also so that my mother and my family could attend, because I knew going to Italy would be a kind of a big task, and I thought it'd be easier for me to come back here than for them to go there. So I got permission, and so in May of that year, 2000, I was ordained a priest by Bishop Fabian.
Mm.
And then shortly after that, when I went back to Italy to say a few of my first masses there, they sent me into my first assignment, which was in Western Australia. So I went to our mission in Perth, the Archdiocese of Perth, and we were out in the bush in a little town called Tujay, which was like a lot of rural towns in Nebraska. Just, the main street was the main highway running through the town, and we were given an old convent that the Mercy Sisters had run, like a boarding school at one time, and that closed, and then the diocese allowed us to take it over and to use it for whatever we wanted to. Eventually we were trying to turn it into a retreat center. And so that was in 2000. I was there till 2003, and then I came back to the United States and been in different friaries since then. So.
Yeah. Tell us about the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate. I know St. Maximilian Kolbe has an influence on you.
Yes, we were conventual Franciscans. Like St. Maximilian Kolbe, our founders were two Neapolitan Italian Franciscans, and they heard from Vatican II that religious orders should go back to their pristine roots of their charism to find out what does it mean to be, what's the essence of your vocation as whatever religious order you are. And they heard that when Pope Paul VI beatified St. Maximilian, Blessed Maximilian, he said he made St. Francis come alive in our day and age. And so they said, we should be imitating someone whom the Pope said made St. Francis come alive in our day and age, because of all the Franciscan saints that have been made saints by the Church, no Pope ever said that this person made St. Francis come alive. Of course, all the saints in some way imitated him, but they took that as a special inspiration that they should follow that clue given to them by Pope Paul VI. So they approached the conventual Father General and they said, we'd like to recreate the spirituality that St. Maximilian Kolbe had at Niepokalanów in the city of the Immaculate, because they thought that that was what eventually helped St. Maximilian imitate St. Francis the best, was because of this Marian devotion that he discerned about total consecration to the Immaculate was really the essence of St. Francis's life. And that St. Francis and all the Franciscans throughout the ages were continuing to, as he called it, the golden thread running throughout the Franciscan order is the Immaculate Conception. And this is what St. Maximilian came to this understanding of total consecration without ever reading St. Louis de Montfort. He didn't know anything about St. Louis de Montfort's true devotion until after he'd already established his militia Immaculate, mainly by just meditating on the Franciscan sources in the life of St. Francis, who said to his friars that, a lot of people all know about San Damiano, where the crucifix spoke to him and said, Francis, go and rebuild my church. But St. Francis said that the order was born, where he received the grace to be a friar minor was not at San Damiano, but at the Portiuncula, the little chapel out in the middle of the fields, Our Lady of the Angels. And he said that this is where you were born. If they throw you out the front door, come in the back, never leave this place. So that for St. Maximilian Kolbe indicated to him that this was, if we're going to continue to live this life as a friar minor, and then we have to live it in that same kind of atmosphere as the Portiuncula, attached to Our Lady in a special way. And that's where he came up with this understanding that he wanted to be consecrated to her, wanted to have a whole city where he had 700 friars living and working, all for promoting Our Lady's cause. So our founders then asked if they could live like this within the conventuals, and they did for 20 years, from about 1970 till 1990, when the new Father General came and he said, I don't want it to continue. He said, I want you to just go back to living like everybody else within the Franciscan conventual order. It's because we had some distinctive features that we were going around in sandals, whereas the conventuals are wearing shoes. they, wearing the miraculous medal in our habit, we even had, they adopted the kind of a bluish gray color because of in the missions where they went to the Philippines, gray was the color that the conventuals wore in the missions. And since they saw that their consecration to Our Lady asked us to be involved in Our Lady's mission, so that makes us missionary, they adopted that color. And even we adopted, because we make a Marian vow, we have four knots instead of 3, because one of the vows is consecration to Our Lady. So in 1990, the Father General, a new one, wanted it to be suppressed. He wanted to just go back and living like the rest of the conventuals. So they appealed to the Pope at that time, or to the Church, the Vatican Congregation for Religious, who was Cardinal Hamer, who was a Dominican, but he happened to be the best friend of the conventual Father General. And he wasn't going to do anything to go against his friend's wishes. So they, you know, we hear ladies sometimes say, oh, we women in the church have no power, we have no power, we know it's men are always, they have all the power. They tried every bishop, cardinal they could find to try and move Cardinal Hamer to change his, to not suppress us, but to erect us as a separate institute. But this is where divine intervention comes in. Our founder, the principal founder, Father Stefano, was a spiritual child of Padre Pio. He grew up pretty much in the shadow of San Giovanni Rotondo. His father would go and see Padre Pio, and as a little boy, he would go with his father, and he'd fall asleep in Padre Pio's arms while they would be talking about Latin and Greek works, because his father, Father Stefano's father, was a Latin and Greek professor, and St. Padre Pio loved to talk about the Latin and Greek works. So they would have, this was something they would talk about as a recreation, and he would go with him, and he served masses for Padre Pio when he was a child. And when it was time for him to reach thinking about a vocation, he went to Padre Pio and said, Padre Pio, I'm ready to join. And Padre Pio looked at him and said, join what? He said, I'm going to join in the Capuchins like you and be a member of the Capuchin order. He said, no, my son, Our Lady has your sufferings waiting for you in the conventual order. Interesting, I said, yeah, Our Lady has your sufferings waiting for you in the conventuals. He didn't know what that meant, but he went to the conventuals. But eventually, as you know, Pope John Paul II went to confession as a young priest, I think it was, or maybe it was only a seminarian. He went to San Giovanni Rotondo, went to confession to Padre Pio, and Padre Pio told him he'd become Pope one day. So there was a connection between John Paul II at that time, Karol Wojtyła, and Padre Pio, and there was a friend of Cardinal Wojtyła at the time named Madame Potowska, who was a psychiatrist who survived a women's concentration camp in Poland, or in World War II. And because of that, she became a psychiatrist, but she came down with cancer in the 1960s. I guess it was considered like she was maybe going to terminal. And so he wrote a letter to Padre Pio and asked him to pray for Madame Potowska to be cured. And Padre Pio prayed for her, and she was miraculously cured of her cancer. But Madame Potowska never got to meet Padre Pio when he was alive, so she got this inspiration that she wanted to go meet someone who knew Padre Pio well, and Father Stefano was known to be an expert in Padre Pio because of his association with him. So she went to go see Father Stefano, and on the day that she went to meet him at Frigento, which at that time was like our main house in Italy, she said, oh, it's so beautiful to see friars here living like St. Maximilian Kolbe and imitating his Neapolitano, spirit of Neapolitano. And he said, well, take a good look. He said, because tomorrow Cardinal Hamer is supposed to sign our document suppressing us. We no longer exist after tomorrow. She said, oh, really? She said, I have breakfast tomorrow with Pope John Paul II. So at breakfast, she mentioned that she had met these friars who have been living the example of St. Maximilian Kolbe, and that they were going to be suppressed that day by Cardinal Hamer. And Pope John Paul II said, oh, really? He said. So he wrote a little note to Cardinal Hamer and said, don't act on this matter. I will take this matter into my own hands. And so on the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in 1990, he erected us as a separate institute. At that time, we were under the Diocese of Benevento, Italy, which was the same diocese that Padre Pio was hometown, home diocese. And in 1998, we became pontifical. So
that's great.
So that's kind of how divine providence works. So.
Yeah. And you and the Franciscan Friars are so devoted to Mary. What do you think is the message that Mary has for the world that we live in today? What's the message the world can learn or take away from Mary?
Well, I think that the thing that we try to do is promote the understanding of being totally consecrated to her. That really the message is that I think from our Lord on the cross himself, when he looked down, he said, "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." And it said that he took her into his home. I think that the message is that not Our Lady herself, but her son is saying, please take Mary, my mother, to be your mother. Take her into your home. Because she is the means by which I've come to you. I became, as even St. Louis de Montfort says, I came to you as a child of Mary. The way for you to best come back to me is to be a child of Mary, is to put yourself totally into her hands and into her care, to be totally consecrated to her. And that, as St. Maximilian Kolbe said, she's the surest, easiest, and quickest way to Christ. So that I think that that's what I think what our Lord wants is everybody to go to his mother. And one of the earliest prayers of the church that we can find written pieces of parchment in Greek is the Sub Tuum Praesidium. We fly to your patronage, O Holy Mother of God. That they found in the 3rd century, that means the 200s, they found that prayer already being written down and composed. That means before it was written, it was being prayed orally by someone before it was even written. So the 200s, that means it probably has its origins in apostolic times. And that's the oldest prayer of the church, is that we fly to our patron. We run to her for protection. And I think that's what Our Lady would want everybody to know, is that she is there for us, and that we don't make use of her as she would like. In the apparition of Our Lady to Sister Catherine Labouré of the miraculous medal, which we wear on our habits, St. Catherine noticed that the rays coming from Our Lady's hands were emanating from rings on her fingers. And she noticed that some of those rings had no light coming from them. And so St. Catherine asked Our Lady, why do some of the rings don't have light coming from them? She said, those are the graces I wish to give to people, but they do not ask.
Wow.
So that sometimes we think, oh, we're pestering God too much, when actually she's saying you're not asking enough. So that was what inspired St. Maximilian Kolbe, that whenever he would pray, he'd always ask for Our Lady's intentions, because she knows better than me what I need for myself. And so he'd always ask for Our Lady's intentions. He'd maybe make what he thought he needed, but he said, but Mother Mary, you know better than I do. You give me what you want. So I think that's probably the message that we want to do, is to Marianize the world. We want to, and to the degree, this is where the late Father Peter Damian, who was one of our spiritual professors, he taught us, but he was a profound theologian. He was able to kind of synthesize St. Francis, St. Bonaventure, Blessed John Duns Scotus, and St. Maximilian Kolbe, that we come to understand that the essence of the Franciscan order is to promote the cause of Mary Immaculate. That's why we exist. If we don't promote the cause of Our Lady, then we have no reason to exist. And that's what St. Maximilian Kolbe thought was the most important thing that he could do, was to the degree that we Marianize, we'll become more like Christ. And so it's not that there's too much Mary, there's not enough.
Wow, well put. And so as we're speaking, we're at the Our Lady of Good Counsel Retreat House in Waverly, Nebraska. and you're here to give a retreat on Our Lady and the brown scapular. So tell us about that spiritual weapon.
Well, it's probably after the Rosary was probably the most popular sacramental, especially with regards to Our Lady in the church. And of course, it all originated in 1251 when St. Simon Stock, who was a Carmelite Father General, was praying to Our Lady because they were in danger of being suppressed. And Our Lady appeared to him and held out the scapular and said, "Receive the habit of your order. Whosoever shall die wearing this habit will not suffer the fires of hell." And so Our Lady is saying, I am your protection. Like I was saying, it's not that we don't go enough to her, that we need to turn to her. And he turned to her and asking for help. And Our Lady came through with this cloth, which seems to be nothing extraordinary. In the time in which St. Simon Stock lived, tunics would have scapulars on them that were like aprons that would be there to protect them from getting their tunic soiled by working or whatever. It was like a work apron. But Our Lady was saying, I want to be your protection. I want to clothe you and protect you from something worse than physical dirt, but spiritual dirt, sin, and which is the worst thing possible because it can take a soul to hell. And so the scapular is a sign of Our Lady's motherly love for us and her protection, and that she worked miracles throughout the ages to convince us of it, to know that if God's behind something, you always look for his credentials. His credentials that he's behind something are miracles. So from the day one when St. Simon Stock received the scapular, Our Lady has been working miracles for those who take the scapular and wear it out of faith and confidence in what she says is true. If you wear this as a sign that you're mine, then I too will be yours. And then we have this special covenant, you might say, or contract, if you want to put it that way, that if you are faithful to me and you do your part, I will always be faithful to you. And of course, sometimes when we're not faithful, Our Lady's still faithful to us. But that pledge of my gift of myself is a sign of that scapular. And it's also a sign of Our Lady's promise that she has your back, you might say, that she's always going to be watching out for you. And throughout the ages, we've seen people who have been protected from physical fire and harm, being, Pope John Paul II wore the scapular since he was like 10 years old. He wrote in his autobiography. And of course, on May 13th, 1981, when he was shot by Mehmet Ali Aga, he was wearing the brown scapular. Now, Our Lady didn't protect him from getting physical suffering, but she did protect him from dying, because the doctors, when they examined Pope John Paul II, said that the bullet traveled a rather unusual trajectory. It went through his body and missed all of his vital organs. And when Mehmet Ali Aga met the Pope, he said, "Why aren't you dead? I was a perfect shot." And he shot him several times. And Pope John Paul II said to him, "Well, you fired the bullet, but Our Lady guided it." And so, but there's been other miracles where, the priest was saying Mass and a man shot at him when he was saying Mass. And they thought he must have missed because the priest continued to say Mass. But when they finally, they subdued the guy and took him out of the little chapel, when he went into the sacristy, he noticed he had a bullet hole in his chasuble. And then he looked, he had a bullet hole in his alb. Then he looked, he had a bullet hole in his cassock. He kept following. He found the bullet was stuck to his scapular like a bulletproof vest. Wow. So that Our Lady, if she has to, can work a miracle to protect us. But most of the time, these little miracles that she works are just, she directs us in this direction instead of that. Or she may protect us from harm because we were in an accident or something. We could have been killed, or we maybe came out it unscathed. There was an explosion that took place. A little boy was at a gas station when this explosion took place. He was burned, but he survived, and he had no scars left after the burns. But other places, you know, people have protected their house before. In Germany, there was a whole fire in a whole neighborhood. The family, before they left the house, they put their scapular on the door, and all the houses were burned down around the neighborhood except that house, which was not touched by fire.
Wow.
But one, I think, because I've been there to see the place, is in Japan during the bombing of Hiroshima. There was a group of Jesuits there who were living, as one of the Jesuits said, we were living the message of Our Lady of Fatima, which means not just praying the rosary every day, but Our Lady appeared at Fatima, the miracle of the sun, as Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And when asked, Sister Lucy said the significance of that was because Our Lady wants everyone to wear the scapular. But Father Jacob, I think it was Hubert Schiffer, said, and he was in the epicenter of the atomic bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima. And they should have been incinerated because it was within the epicenter, the temperature was 10,000 degrees centigrade. Mm-hmm. And yet he and his brother Jesuits, the most harm he had was he had some glass embedded in the back of his head and was blown out of the house. And the others had some minor injury, but none of them suffered the effects of radiation sickness or poisoning. And he lived to be 85, 84 years old. And when asked, they said, well, why don't you have burns? Why don't you have radiation sickness? He said, because we were living the message of Fatima, because Our Lady was protecting them.
Wow.
So
finally, Father, you know, people look out and they see a culture that has gone astray. They see that there are people who are leaving the church at times. Some people are saying we live in troubled times. So what's your message, if you could sum it all up, what's your message of comfort or of hope that you would have to those people who are worried at this time?
Well, I guess I would say every age of the church has always had its trials and difficulties. You might say, sometimes we say, oh, back in the good old days, or there wasn't, but every age has had its trials, tribulations, things that we are concerned about. I think that no matter when we live, those things are not going to change. But one thing is constant is God's love for us, and of course His mother's always there for us throughout every age. Back in the time of the Battle of Lepanto, people thought, oh, you know, we're in danger of being destroyed, and our whole life, as we know as Catholics, is going to be undone. But Our Lady came through and saved the day then. I think it's something that we need to just have always confidence. Our Lady said at Akita in Japan, the rosary and the sign left by my son will be your two weapons, your two arms by which you can survive anything. Devotion to Our Lady and the sign left by my son, ultimately Father Yasuda says it's the Eucharist. Those are our two things that we should always look to. And no matter what age of the church we're in, is devotion to Our Lady and her son's Eucharist. Those are the two things that are going to get us through any difficulty. It's Jesus and Mary. Those are the two people that we should place our confidence in, because they're the ones that have paid the ultimate price for us, Christ by His death on the cross, and Our Lady by her co-redemption, by her offering herself with her son. So that should be our hope. Our hope isn't in, you know, Scripture says don't put your hope in princes or in horses, meaning princes, the civil, anybody who's an earthly ruler, you can't put your confidence in them. You can't put it in your power that you have or wealth that you have. You know, we think, oh, we're the most powerful military in the world, but that doesn't mean anything, because those are not the things that are going to help us or be our strength. Our strength is in the Lord and in His Holy Mother. So I think that that's something that no matter what trials or difficulties we find, that we always have to stay close to Jesus and Mary. I remember there's a story about Colonel Ripley. He was one of the most decorated Marines, and he got a medal of valor for doing something very heroic, and he was the only one who stood between him and a few hundred, 80,000 North Vietnamese soldiers. He had to blow up this bridge that existed between crossing the river. And he was the only one there he had to blow up this bridge. And he was at the end of his strength. You know, he had to do like jungle walking, you know, bars underneath the bridge to get to where he had to plant the explosives. And he was at the end of his physical strength. But the thing he kept saying that got him through it was he said, Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there. That to me is kind of like what we need to be praying every day when we wake up in the morning and before we go to bed at night is, Jesus, Mary, get me there. Because that's our strength. And that's how we're going to go through anything. And that's how we will have the grace. Our Lord's not going to take away our crosses. He's just going to give us the strength to carry them. Because the cross is where we have our salvation, and it's where we get our merit from carrying our crosses, not running away from them. So I think that's ultimately that has to be our motto and our constant theme as Jesus, Mary, get me there.
Yeah, that's great advice and a great message of hope as we come up on the Jubilee year in 2025. What the theme is hope. So, Father Elias Mary Mills, welcome back to Nebraska.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.